This week, Paul and I discuss the importance of a strong AppSec and development partnership. In the news, the RTorrent client can be exploited to mine Monero. Kali Linux is now an app in the Windows Store. And someone has built a Minecraft GUI for Docker. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library, on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30.
Welcome everyone to episode 8, our 9th episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlett, and I am excited to be joined by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
Thanks, Keith. Good to be here today. Recording a little earlier. But we've got awesome stuff to talk about that I am always excited to go through all the things you put together for this show, Keith. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I look forward to some of the articles in the news. Do we want to do any announcements up front, Paul?
Yeah, just a really quick on the conference front. We're going to be at 4 upcoming conferences this year. The 3 that are in the show notes that all have discount codes are Source Boston, May 9th and 10th. InfoSec World in Orlando, the 19th through the 21st. That's coming up soon. Secure World Expo is next week, March something. So whatever.
14th and 15th.
Whatever
March
next.
14th and 15th.
14th and 15th is Secure World Expo. Then InfoSec World. Then it's Source. In order. And we have discount codes for all of those conferences. There is a Rhode Island Social Engineering Conference that's happening in June. I'll be presenting at all of these conferences except for Secure World Expo, where I'll be there catching up with vendors and the like. My talk for InfoSec World, actually very much, there's some overlap with this show, and I have had some interesting experiences getting some open source tools working. I have to say, I am now an even bigger fan of the Security Onion project, and actually an informal poll of our Twitter followers shows that a lot of our audience is also fans of Snort, Suricata, and all of the tools that they're including inside of Security Onion. The experimental version, to kind of transfer into some actual content, actually has a full elk stack in the experimental version, which means you get a Kibana web interface that you can look at all the connections, all the different protocols, and it'll analyze your bro logs as well as some of your syslog. If I am not sending much syslog, any remote syslog to it yet, but looking at that interface, I was like, wow. And the setup was so easy, and it let me just jump right into analysis. And having set up a lot of those tools, most of those tools by hand in the past, I know what a pain in the butt it can be. And this really just lets you jump right into the analysis phase. The experimental version, speaking of where it overlaps in this show, it is the experimental version of Security Onion, and I've tried to get some beta versions of other software running on it. And so I'm a little too ahead of the curve, and I need some of the developers, short of spending my own time and reporting the bugs, I need the developers to make some fixes. But I'm sure in the next couple of months that stuff will get worked out. I'm really impressed, dude. I did a whole bunch of analysis on my network. It was nice to get back to that's kind of interesting. It was like riding a bike. I was like, oh, I haven't done this in a while, but you guys really need to update Java, and we really need to put we really need to put an SSL cert on that another system, because I'm staring at someone's password in my Squeal Snort analysis console. So that's been a lot of fun. A lot of great open source tools for security enterprise defense that I'll be covering in that talk, as well as the first half of the talk will really be about those common misconceptions, reasons why you want to use open source, reasons you don't, and how to balance the two. So I'm really excited about that talk and all the conferences coming up.
Yeah, me too. I mean, especially with the storms we just got here in the Northeast, going down to Lake Buena Vista, Florida for a week.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Case, sounds real good, real good. I have one special announcement as well, which is BugCrowd, the company that I work for, is hiring. So we just closed our Series C funding round at $26 million, and we are expanding our headcount across the organization. Check out bugcrowd.com/careers. Or if you have questions about any of the roles or jobs, please feel free to email me, hoodie@securityweekly.com. I know that specifically here in the East Coast and in the Boston area, more specifically, we are looking for both trust and security engineers, which is what I currently do for BugCrowd, as well as solutions architects. So if you have any questions about either of those two roles specifically, I am very happy to give information out or answer any questions about that.
Sweet.
With that, Paul, I think that's a kind of a good segue because, in this case, you're working with open source software and doing a talk on it. BugCrowd does application security through crowdsourced testing. And this week, we're going to be talking about the AppSec development partnership. I always find that one of the most interesting things about security in general, and Paul, you probably have some thoughts on this as well, is often we kind of beat the drum of, developers do things badly, but we never stop to really think about or act in a way that we're trying to build partnerships with developers. I feel like that's starting to change with the rise of application security as kind of a practice. But to some degree or another, there's still kind of these old systems or processes that are in place that hammer on developers. And I feel like DevOps is just kind of running away from security unless we actually start to get embedded in the process. Very, very interested in getting kind of your thoughts on what you've seen in the history of security as an industry, Paul, and the changes that are coming about and how we need to get better at partnering with developers.
Yeah, I think where I want to take that is based on a book I'm kind of rereading that I haven't read in a long time. I don't know if I ever finished it the first time either, but now I'm listening to The Phoenix Project. Have you read?
Great book.
Okay, so I'm glad you did read this. I figured you did. I didn't ask you before on the show. That's Gene Kim, Kevin Bear, Spaff, and Chris Roon is the narrator. I'm assuming that's the narrator I'm listening to when I read the audiobook, and he's doing a great job. And that's what I really like about that book is it's not just about DevOps, but it talks about IT, some of the process improvements that we can make there. And it also now, a little ways into the book, starting to talk about the DevOps process. And it's interesting how in the book they're rolling out software, the Phoenix Project, and they describe all the problems they're having with the release they're talking about in the book. And in my head, I'm going, wow, yeah, DevOps can really solve most of your problems for you if you implement it correctly. And now I can see where they're going in the book, right? Into solving some of those problems. And it's very much the stuff that we've talked about on this show. And it certainly, involves that, they said something was really funny to talk about this relationship between IT and security and developers. They said, well, we had virtualization and that was supposed to save our butts with the rollout of the software, but we had performance problems and they blamed the virtualization software. So we put everything on regular servers on hardware again, and now they have all those traditional I put software on hardware problems of deployment and logistics issues. Like I can get the hardware. So in the book, they're at the point where, okay, we identified the more of the hardware that we need, but we don't have any place to put it, right? We don't have the physical rack space. And so it's nice to know that we have these processes today, but certainly that collaboration is something that just didn't happen overnight. And so the reason I mention this is the Phoenix Project is in its 5th anniversary edition, and I don't have too much information, but there is a new book coming out, and I haven't had a chance to catch up with Gene just yet. I am speaking with Gene and company to be able to go and have him on the show and start that process to have him on the show, because there is I forget what the name of the new book is. Hold on, I've got it here. There is it looked like a pre-release copy when I saw it. So hold on. So I'm just going through my DMs here because I can't find the new book. I've got a lot of DMs.
While you're looking for it, Paul, one of the things that I really enjoyed about the Phoenix Project as a whole, and I tell anybody that I have ever worked with in the security space, whether you're a vendor, whether you're a security operations team, whether you're a security engineer, or even in the application security space, if you want to know how security is thought of by the rest of the organization, not all the time, but I would say most of the time, go read that book, because for the majority of that book, security is really seen as an inhibitor to getting the job done and a friction point. And unfortunately, that seems to be more and more the case for most organizations, where I know of people that I'm good friends with here in the greater Boston area that they're no longer invited to meetings for upcoming releases of the product, because as a security practitioner, the company was sick and tired of hearing that they had vulnerabilities that they just didn't want to fix. And so to that end, I think that DevOps is perhaps more inviting to the security process, as long as the security people that are involved aren't the people of no, but the people of yes, but like how can we implement this in a secure way, or think ahead of these problems in a secure way. So definitely one of those things that if you haven't read the Phoenix Project and you are interested to get a feel for at least what security is thought of by developers, by IT operations, by marketing and the rest of the organization, you'll learn pretty quickly that it's not all roses and rainbows and unicorns for what most of other people outside the echo chamber think of security practitioners. And I think we're turning the corner with DevOps, as they show at the end of the book.
Yeah, so it's called Beyond the Phoenix Project. It's a transcript of the audio series with Gene Kim and John Willis. It's a 9-part discussion that includes an oral history of the DevOps movement, as well as discussions around pivotal figures and philosophies that DevOps draws upon.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And also, one other thing as well is most people don't necessarily know, but the Phoenix Project is actually an accompaniment to another book called the DevOps Handbook.
Yes.
Which is nice, because if you're looking for a fiction, or it's fiction based on history or based on reality, read the Phoenix Project is good because it's told as a story. But if you're then looking to take the lessons that they talk about in the Phoenix Project and implement them in your organization, the DevOps Handbook goes literally hand in hand with the book, the Phoenix Project.
Mm-hmm. What I like, and what most people will say about the Phoenix Project, which really helps with this topic, Keith, which is why I bring it up again, is the characters in the book are people that you will identify with if you've been working in IT, security, and or development for any length of time. Like, you're all going to say, yes, I worked with the Wes character, the Patty character, the Bill character, the Brent character, which is really one that I can relate to as well. I think and you'll see it in yourself too. You're like, well, like sometimes I've totally been the Wes character and just said whatever's on my mind, right? Sometimes I've been the Brent character and I've just, I've been working with this technology for a while, and I help people, with their technical issues, and that's all my day is consumed with. So there's a lot of really great stuff in there, and I'm looking forward to catching up with Gene. Josh Corman is the one that actually made me aware of that, so probably have him on the show as well. So all that's in the works. But really relating to all the, so this is a good time for our listeners on this subject to read up on this subject and kind of become engrossed with the interactions of the various players, IT, security, and development, as it relates to DevOps. To go back and reread the Phoenix Project, or read it if you haven't read it the first time, or listen to it. I really like the audio version. I'm just laughing out loud at some of the parts too, because Bill's laptop, it just creates so much humor in the book.
Yeah.
And Wes is always making fun of him for it, and I look forward to like what Wes is going to say next about poor Bill's laptop that's held together by tape, literally. So yeah, it's awesome.
And so to some degree, I think that in more modern or more forward-thinking companies, the relationship between application security and development is actually getting tighter, which is good, right? at the end of the day, if security is embedded in the process of development, whether it's being part of the sprint reviews or attending the stand-ups and offering to pitch in or give insights into different processes. If someone says in their stand-up, "Oh, today I am implementing the connection from our application to the database," and that's a great time for a security practitioner to say, "Hey, could I sit down with you and get an understanding of how you're looking to implement that?" I've done this a few times with a couple of different companies, and I know where it can go badly, and I'd like to make sure that we can get out ahead of this. It always reminds me of kind of that phrase, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure."
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that I think, especially with the whole IT operations model changing so much with the cloud, I feel like security and IT operations, the more that they can become embedded in the process of development, even if it's just getting an understanding for what they're trying to implement, and then giving good feedback, guidelines, processes. You don't have to sit down and write code to really be involved in the process, as much as you can be a body of knowledge that quite literally can support, enhance, and enable the development team to push forward quickly. And then at the other side of it, they don't have to go back and fix things because you prevented the need for fixing things.
Well,
hopefully.
So here's an interesting scenario that I've been dealing with here that I'd like to, and it absolutely speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Keith. And I think if we look at the architecture and we look at how development, IT, and security can collaborate in the architecture, the question that I have today, and this is going to vary depending on the scenario, and it probably is good segments to have on upcoming shows, so we don't necessarily have to answer it now. But for those of you that are like me that are thinking about, okay, so I've got a software project, I've got it in Docker, and now when we look at the development process, where do we want to deploy this, and how do we want to deploy it? Do we want to have it on-premise and run the hardware ourselves, maybe use virtualization? And those are two separate things, right? Do we want to put it somewhere in the cloud and use infrastructure as a service? So we want to put it on DigitalOcean, Linode, or Amazon AWS, or Azure, or Google Cloud, and just spin up new virtual, basically virtual infrastructure to run our containers on? Or do we want to jump into something like a hosted OpenShift or Amazon ECS, Elastic Container Service, ECS, right? And so then there's a lot of other questions that come up as part of that, which some of them I have directly for you, Keith, about that. But that's probably the first conversation where you're going to start to have that interaction, is about where does the infrastructure live, and what's the best choice for us today, and maybe where should we be moving towards? What I found into looking into ECS is there's a pretty big learning curve. Like, even if you know Docker, even if you know Amazon AWS really well, which I don't, I understand it almost enough to help out with the architecture. But it seemed to me like that learning curve to jump into ECS is big. So my question is, like, my higher level executive hat on, is what's the benefit? Like, if we spend that time, what's the benefit? And so I think that's a whole bunch of probably fodder, Keith, for future conversations. But I think it speaks to some of the initial conversations that you're going to have between operations and development.
Yeah, and it also gives you an idea of the human element that could be a problem as well, right? So if ECS is a huge learning curve and you invest time and effort into getting someone, either hiring someone or training someone to do it, who's their backup when they go on vacation? Who's their backup when they're sick? Who's their backup if they get poached by a competitor who offers them a crazy good salary, right? And so it's thinking about those human elements just as much as it is thinking about the architecture, because to the extent that if you are going to push it to, I don't know, DigitalOcean, for example, that's a pretty good one for Docker containers. To that end, do you have all the processes in place to be able to do that repeatably? Do you have all the documentation that you need to make sure that anyone that's new, that's hired as a developer or as a security practitioner or IT operations or what have you, has the information readily available to know what that process looks like?
Wait, so also, go back, Keith. So DigitalOcean, do they have a container server where I can push my containers directly to DigitalOcean?
Yeah. It's like droplets. Yep.
Okay.
So I
Interesting.
imagine that's probably you're going to be like, all right, notes.
Notes, yeah, taking a note because we do have presence in a lot of these cloud providers for various purposes, and that's really interesting. It's really interesting. My other question was compatibility with ECS, right? Because it's like they have their own registry. So if you already have a Docker registry, how do those two things interact?
Yeah, that I don't readily know offhand. But again, it's the sort of thing that, if you're in an organization where you're thinking about it and you're like, okay, we're going to start leveraging, Docker and microservices and containerization as a means to move forward because it is a better, more secure, configurable way to actually push code out in a way that we can control repeatably. Then it's thinking about the next level of questions, right? Is, okay, now depending on where we decide to have this reside, is it going to play well interoperably with other, cloud services that we either make use of or would like to make use of because they're considered best in breed? So that's the beauty of at least having an understanding as to it. Greenfield projects are the best way to do this because you know ideally where you want to go, but nothing's been built yet.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think most organizations live in like a brownfield situation where
that's where we're at. Yep.
Everything's everywhere.
It begs the question, like with your database, like with MySQL, do you just host that on Amazon, or do you continue to have a MySQL instance? Is it one instance for everyone? Right now we deploy it as a separate container, and where does the storage live? And so those are all architecture questions that should involve both IT, security, and development. And these are the things you're going to have to, face in challenges and decisions you're going to have to make.
And I think that the other side of it as well is expectations of having this knowledge for people that you hire in the organization, right? Docker as a container solution is so new comparative to what most people are used to in IT operations, which is, virtualization from VMware or VirtualBox. So it's not only that in terms of you have to upskill existing talent that you have in your organization, but just the same, they're not training this in college. They're not training this, at boot camps for the most part. I mean, you can go to DockerCon and take a training and get a certification for it. But
now AWS, and actually, Kyle and I, developers we have here, did learn some AWS in school, which is encouraging. That's good. That's an awesome start, right? But yeah, the Docker stuff I haven't seen.
Yeah, that's hugely forward thinking. I'm surprised that that they've adopted AWS, though. I would say that when I was taking classes at university more recently, just to kind of brush up on some of my skill sets, AWS will give something like $100 credit to students if you have a student email account. So they are very much trying to encourage, in the same way that Apple gave computers to schools to get people to love the Apple product early. AWS is doing effectively the same thing. Build your play applications or your gaming applications or whatever you're building. Build it on AWS, and here's some free credits to do that, which was pretty encouraging, believe it or not. I thought it was kind of nice. I didn't really use it all that much, but I know that they also offer a lot of free video-based training around AWS and like how to leverage it. So I wonder if that's kind of the future that we're headed toward is companies making kind of free use of at college and high school levels of their software as a service. And then from there, offering up some sort of free training. I know maybe it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point, there was an article that we were covering which showed that Microsoft was building training that a university was then making use of as part of a course, because the university system as it exists today is old and slow in terms of their adoption. I mean, if we had Doug on here, he'd be like, "Yep, yes."
Yeah, I was actually just talking about that the other day with Doug, and I think that if you're a software engineer or going to school for software engineering, I think the expectation now from employers is that you understand not just the language, right? And I feel like the language, it doesn't matter which program, and you can probably go learn a bunch of different languages. And in the language skill, I think there's a gap with secure coding, but the language skill is important. But I think employers want people that know things like Git and Docker and AWS. It wouldn't it be great to have graduates that have some level of exposure to those technologies? And I'm not saying you have to be a complete expert, but having that knowledge, some level of knowledge and training that's how you're going to deploy your code now, is a combination of Git and Docker and some kind of cloud service, is hopefully something we start seeing adoption in all these college and university programs.
And build pipelines like Jenkins too, right? Like being able to push your code, get it to build. Doing tests, I think, is one of the hardest lessons for students to actually realize is valuable for them to do. One of the professors that was teaching an assembly course that had, it was basically C with some assembly helper functions. He encouraged the students strongly, every single program that we were writing, to build your own tests, because at the end of the day, if you understand how it works to the extent that you can actually build a test to make sure it works the way you think, then you're well on your way to doing it right. And so to that end, having like a Jenkins, a knowledge of Jenkins or similar, continuous integration, continuous development tooling to run test suites that you've built is going to give you a leg up from the development standpoint as well, which is really quite awesome. And in fact, just briefly touching on it, Paul, the talk that I'm giving at InfoSec World is actually all about teaching yourself not only how to code, but also how to code securely, and then also how to test for security flaws in the process. So that is something that we'll probably talk a little bit about next week, just before InfoSec World. I think we'll maybe highlight both of our talks during that segment or during this segment for next week's show. So
awesome. And I know that we're probably a little bit pressed for time on this segment. I did want to briefly touch on the learning and tools section. So recently, related to my talk, I launched a website called attackdriven.io. It's mostly related to my talk that I'm giving at InfoSec World, but it's also a little bit of like a resume type website for myself today. But I built it in Vue.js, which is a new framework. Again, yet another JavaScript framework. But what I found that was really nice about it in comparison to my experience with the mean stack, so Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node, or even React.js, was Vue has built-in routing as part of the framework itself. There's no third party that you have to pull in and make use of to try and get routing to work within the application. And as an experience from developing it, it was actually pretty straightforward and fairly lean. What I ended up doing is I ended up using part of the DOM manipulation that Vue does, where in each view you have kind of scripts that you can write out, and I just did JSON arrays of JSON objects that had all of the content that the page was going to display, and then I built a mobile view of it, and then simply I took the same sort of process and put together a desktop view of it as well, all from the same content. So it's edit once, it replaces all of the content everywhere for both versions of the page. And so to that end, Vuetify, which is similar to Bootstrap, is the tooling that I use to make the display work the way I wanted it to. So if you're interested in checking out a new framework that does a lot of things kind of fun and interestingly, but also lightweight and simply or straightforward, check out Vue.js. My friend at Microsoft, Ray Bango, introduced it to me, and he's actually coming to InfoSec World. So maybe I'll introduce him to you as well, Paul, when we're there. Awesome.
Last thing I want to cover just in learning and tools as well. So book recommendations this week, it's the Phoenix Project, but I also wanted to include a book that I've recently completed called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And it talks about how basically this, as a society, we are moving to a point where those that can complete deep work or do deep work are going to vastly outpace their peers in terms of value provided to the companies that they work for. So it's a little bit about time management, a little bit about making sure that you are focusing on or enabling yourself to do deep work. So it gives you kind of strategies around that. But it also it also trains you on how to ask for timing to be able to perform deep work at your role in your organization. So I'm actually working on a talk for time management for InfoSec professionals that I've proposed to a couple of conferences at this point, somewhat related to some of the topics in that book as well. So check it out, Deep Work by Cal Newport. And with that, we'll take a break and come back for this week's news.